Hello and welcome to the Note to File podcast, a collection of interviews, best practices, and candid commentary for clinical research sites. I'm your host, Brad Hightower, founder of Hightower Clinical, a clinical trial site network providing consulting services and end-to-end personalized research infrastructure to physicians with no upfront costs. You can learn more at hightowerclinical.com. If you're enjoying the Note to File podcast, we encourage you to rate, review, and subscribe to the show so we can continue to provide quality content to a larger audience. All show notes, episode transcripts, and contact information can be found at notetofilepodcast.com. Our guest today is Tiffany Ashton. Tiffany's been in the clinical research industry for over 18 years, holding positions such as Clinical Research Coordinator, Clinical Research Associate, and Clinical Trial Manager. She's gained both sponsor and CRO experience in various indications, including oncology, gene therapy, and rare disease. In her current role as Director of Operations with ClinEssentials, Tiffany works with a team of clinical research professionals who strive to help the industry save time and stay organized by providing pre-printed audit documentation that replaces standard yellow sticky notes currently used in monitoring. In this episode, we discuss how to go from CRC to CRA, the importance of relationship building and leveraging your network, and continual development and reflection in your career. Without further ado, Tiffany Ashton. All right, Tiffany, thanks so much for coming on today. I really appreciate it.
No problem, Brad. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, so I was originally drawn to a post you put on LinkedIn that was talking about sort of all the different ways people come to clinical research. And, you know, the first question I always lead with all of my guests is, tell me how you got into clinical research in the first place. I think it's a awesome question. It opens up all kinds of different perspectives on, you know, how people enter the industry, why they enter the industry, and kind of how they end up where they are. So tell us a little bit about your journey or how you started out.
Perfect. Yeah. So as you said, everyone is different. I don't think I've ran into one person that has had the same entry point into the industry. And, you know, when I graduated high school, I was in Los Angeles and had moved to San Diego for schooling. So I was attending San Diego State University. And I was looking for my first part-time job. And I applied for an admin assistant position at a site management organization. And at that time, I didn't know what a site management organization was. And when they had let me know, you know, we do clinical research trials, I was like, I didn't even know clinical research trials were even a thing or this whole industry even existed. So I was very curious just from that initial, you know, we do clinical trials to help pharmaceutical companies bring drugs to market. And I said, wow. And so, you know, as an admin with the SMO, I just got in and just kind of observed, you know, I observed the day-to-day life of the clinical research coordinators. And what our SMO did, we had a main office, and then we would go, the CRCs would travel to different doctors within the community, and they would have like a research office at that doctor's practice. So the doctors were adding research to their practice, not necessarily research only, but just incorporating the two. And so I sat at the main office and I would watch them, you know, get ready for their visit to the doctor's office and, you know, put all of their lab kits and their binders and, you know, all of the things that they needed to see their patients. And so I just observed that and I was like, wow, I would love to do something like that. And so I spoke to the clinical director and I said, you know, this is something that I would be interested in. Is it something that I can learn, maybe shadow or kind of on the job training? Is that something that you would be willing to teach me? And the clinical director, she was great. She ended up being my mentor in just getting into the industry. But she said, yes, I think you would be actually a really good study coordinator. And so just that simple conversation kind of opened the door to me becoming a study coordinator with that SMO. And we basically, what I did was I took, I think it was 2 courses on medical terminology, because at this time I was still doing my undergrad at San Diego State. So I was in college courses, but I took 2 medical terminology courses just to make sure that I knew the medical lingo. I also sat in on, site initiation visits that were being conducted for the various doctors. I sat in on site selection visits as well. And, I saw some of that. I sat in on interim monitoring visits, also site closeout visits, attended trainings, so they slowly started adding me to the site training and site delegation logs across their studies. And I just sat and just kind of observed, I didn't touch anything. And I shadowed at about maybe 6 weeks of just kind of observing, taking my medical course. I started shadowing like the day to day of a study coordinator. And I did that for about 3 months of shadowing. So about 4.5 months of just kind of observing, shadowing before they said, okay, we have a new study that's starting. How about you take this and you lead this one study? And the rest was history. That was my start. That was my start in the industry.
No, and I love that because I think even now I still see so many people sort of look down on the idea of somebody getting into clinical research on the site level who don't have some sort of specific medical or clinical experience.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that, your path speaks to the point that, if you have solid soft skills, then you can learn medical terminology. You can learn how to follow a protocol. You can learn how to collect data with high quality. So I love that because, again, I know when I look for coordinators, I'm looking for people who have great characteristics and not necessarily what their, clinical background may be. Of course, that can be helpful, but, I love hearing that you sort of, again, went from admin to clinical research coordinator. I mean, that's awesome. I love that.
Yeah. And, because of how we were set up, we would travel from the main office to the various doctor's offices. And that doctor had their own medical practice. So we would have the phlebotomist there. We would have a medical assistant that could do the ECGs. So I didn't have to get into the nitty gritty of medical per se, because we had a team that I can say, okay, can you draw this blood, or can you do this this ECG for me, and go, and I was doing, more of the protocol specific items. And over the years, I learned, additional medical terminologies, how to read a medical chart, the PI and the sub-I, they gave me a lot of guidance, but it was really about someone taking a chance and seeing those soft skills, like you mentioned, Brad, and being willing to put in a little bit of time. And look at me now, 18 years in the industry. I went on to get a master's in clinical research, and I've run global trials, phase 1 through 4, in all indications: oncology, gene therapy, and rare disease. And it all stems back to, that clinical director seeing something in me and me having that drive, and you can do it. And so, I want to encourage those that are looking to get into the industry, that have a desire to be a coordinator or even a CRA or a CTM, to go ahead and, start there, start at the site level. You can start as an admin assistant, express that you're interested in, maybe learning other roles, and then take the opportunity when maybe a study coordinator is overworked or doesn't have enough time. You say, hey, can you teach me how to do that? Maybe I can do that for you. And you start getting those skills, and slowly, when they see you in that manner, they're saying, you can definitely be a study coordinator, and the practices already, so it's a no-brainer for us. Let's bring you on.
Right. Yeah. And two things about that strike me. One is that, just by being, in the proximity of the things that are going on, again, you could have picked up phlebotomy skills along the way. You could have continued to pick up, more clinical skills. But I mean, to win, you got to be in the game, and you were, and that took coming in as an admin assistant. And the second part that strikes me that ties into that is that it took time.
Yeah.
And I've noticed that it takes a long time to be a good coordinator, I think.
It does.
Because you really have to be exposed to so many things before you understand how it sort of all fits together into the
Exactly.
bigger picture. And, unfortunately, you just don't, it doesn't happen quickly. It happens in sort of these little snippets. And then eventually you put it all together and you're able to sort of see the bigger picture and say, oh, I really get it now.
Mm-hmm.
But again, it all goes back to, you raising your hand up and saying, I want to do this. How can I get involved? And again, I think that's awesome. So where did you go from there? How long did you do that? And where did you go from there?
So when I graduated from San Diego State University, at that point, I had 4 years of coordinating experience. And, I knew that I was interested probably at year 3 of being a study coordinator, that I was interested in being a CRA because I was intrigued by the travel, seeing new sites and working with new doctors all the time, maybe being on different protocols. So being a CRA excited me. And so I was given the opportunity right after, literally, it was like almost the day I graduated. there was an opening that they were looking for experienced coordinators to almost do like a hybrid CRA/CRC role. And the reason why I say it was hybrid it was because it was a phase 4 study and it was a medical device study. And the FDA had asked that this particular company track 60,000 women who had gotten breast implants in a long-term observational study. So it was a unique study because 60,000, that's a lot. I have never been on a study that
Right.
you have 60,000 of anything. It's usually 1,000, 2,000, maybe 3,000 patients across the study. So 60,000 women were being tracked and their outcome of their breast implant surgery for 15 years. And what made it unique was we had to work with plastic surgeons. And plastic surgeons, most of them don't know about research. And they could care less about research because, they're in their whole world of plastic surgery and making the big bucks there. And this was almost like a mandate on them to enroll a certain portion of their breast implant surgeries into this study. Otherwise, the device could potentially be pulled off the market if the FDA didn't get their data. So the reason why it was a hybrid study is because I had to go in for some of these plastic surgeon sites. I had to help their nurse or their main patient coordinator I had to teach them how to consent. And for some of their patients, I consented them. So I was like a study coordinator. But for other sites, I was more so of a monitor because I was just monitoring that the consent was done correctly. So that's why I said it was like a hybrid position because it wasn't anything that I had seen up to that point. And honestly, is nothing that I've seen since because it was a special, unique medical device study. And the numbers were such a big number, 60,000. And we had like research naive to the T with plastic surgeons that really didn't know anything about research. That was it was really interesting, but I really enjoyed it because it was almost like a stepping stone into CRA world. It wasn't full on. I had to do from A to Z. I was maybe doing A to D on CRA, but then I also was able to use some of my CRC skills of, hey, this is how you properly consent. These are the records that we need to keep, and helping them get processes in place in order to conduct the study. And then also following up with the patients that were enrolled to do their questionnaires that they had to do on a certain, I think it was like every 6 months basis. So I was in that role. It was a contract role actually. And they kept extending my contract for a year. And I ended up being in that contract role for 3.5 years in total. And at that point, we had enrolled all 60,000 women, and they could take over the maintenance and sending out the questionnaires to them every 6 months now that they were enrolled in the trial. So that was my first kind of exposure to the CRA world. And then that was my first exposure to the contract world as well to be a contractor versus a permanent employee.
So what kind of, and I see it all the time. I personally never had an interest in, doing any CRA work, but we see it a lot. People are interested in how to do it, and they seem to have, troubles bridging that gap between site level experience and becoming a CRA. So, what sort of insight do you have that, you might tell people to give them a little bit more of a leg up in that journey?
Yeah, so great question, Brad. So right now in the industry is smoking hot. When I tell you we're smoking hot right now, it's smoking. If you're trying to get in and bridge that gap, this is the time right now. And we go through these waves and seasons, and you've probably seen it too, Brad, where it's like we have too many studies and not enough help. And then we have too many people, but not enough studies. But right now we have too many studies and not enough help. And especially these big CROs, the IQVIAs, the ICONs, the par excels, those big CROs, they are always taking on big studies and maybe multiple year studies and multiple drugs coming in a portfolio from the big pharma companies. Sometimes they bite off a little bit more than they can chew, and they don't have enough. They don't have enough people, and they've already signed on the dotted line. So the reason why I say that is right now, you want to go, if you're a study coordinator and you're looking to become a CRA, go and look and keep your eye out. Indeed.com is a good one, where you go on indeed.com and you can go on and you can type in clinical research associate. And then you want to look for entry level or CRA1. You want to look for the qualifications at that level. When there's too much demand and not enough staff, when those qualifications kind of change. So right now, what I've seen is that they're willing to take a senior study coordinator or a study coordinator with 2 or 3 years or a study coordinator with 1 year, depending on the company. And they will train them, give them on the job CRA training. Now is the time to look for that because the industry is hot. Now maybe 12 months, 18 months, 2 years from now, the industry, there's not as much demand. There's not that many studies. And then, they don't need as many people. And then at that time, they may even change the criteria for a clinical research associate 1 to be, you got to have 1 year monitoring experience. So they may switch it. But right now, because there's such a need, it's like, come one, come all. If you're coming with something and you know about research and you are being a study coordinator 2, 3, 4 years, we can use you because we can bridge that gap with our SOPs and our structure and our onboarding. So this is the time. Like if you're really interested, that's one way. Look for openings, look for I know MedPace is a CRO and they have a CRA training program. And I think ICON has a CRA bridge program. And those are basically where they are going to teach you how to be a CRA. And they would love for you to be coming, if you're a study coordinator, perfect, because you have 2, 3 years and you understand at least the basics of what a monitor usually looks for. And so they can bridge that gap. So that's why it's called like a bridge program, because they can bridge that gap of where you're coming and where you should be as a CRA and help support you. So that's one avenue of kind of, if a CRC is looking to be a CRA, that's one avenue to get in.
Strike while the iron's hot.
Yeah, strike when the iron's hot, and it's hot right now. And it's because of COVID. COVID released such an influx of new studies in the industry. But what we have to realize is we still had all the other drugs that were in the pipeline for oncology and rare disease and cardiovascular, obesity. Those still were in the pipeline for the various pharmaceutical companies. They just got put on the back burner because COVID is in the spotlight right now. So then it came all these COVID studies But we still have those other studies that have been on the back burner. So that's why there's a need even more so than 2019, is because we had COVID happen. So it was almost like the perfect storm. Not necessarily COVID was a good thing, but for those looking for opportunities, the opportunities are now because of there's just an influx of new studies right now going on in the industry, plus the old.
Yep. No, that makes perfect sense.
Yeah. And so that's one way, looking for entry level positions for companies. Another way is if you're a CRC, you have 1, 2, 3, maybe 10, up to 10 CRAs that you're interacting with at one point in time. One point in time, you're interacting with those CRAs, whether it's via phone, via email, via them coming on site for monitoring visits. Establish a good rapport with those CRAs. The CRAs can be your friends. Like I know sometimes it's like, some of the dynamic relationships, it's not so friendly between CRAs and CRCs, but ideally everyone should work together. And I know as a CRA, you acknowledge and you see and you know who's a good study coordinator. And you keep that person in the back of your mind. Hey, if I see something come across my email that we're looking for new CRAs, do you have any referrals? I'm going to keep that lovely CRC in mind when I see that email. So get friendly with your CRAs, but be genuine too. You don't want to come off that you're just using them to get in, but establish a good relationship, good rapport, good communication. Because when a CRA is at a CRO and they say, hey, do you guys know anyone in your network? And they see the criteria, they can say, oh yeah, I do know a study coordinator, since they're taking study coordinators. Yeah, I do. I can send over this person's name. And then because the CRA is already in the CRO, they can even put an extra, oh yeah, she's great with communication, oh, he's excellent with organization, he's very timely, he would be a perfect CRA. And so that's why it's really good to have those good relationships with your CRAs when you're on the site level as a coordinator. So that's another way in, and especially now that the CROs are hiring like hot, they're just hiring. They are, I guarantee you, they are sending out mass emails to all of their current staff. Do you know anybody that you can refer for these openings? And so that's another way in, by speaking and just being friendly with your CRA.
Yeah, and well, I think it's always a good idea, I think, to, create good relationships and network. But just like that, I mean, I think, you create a good relationship with your CRA, show them you do good work, be responsive to them. And then when these opportunities come around, it becomes that much easier to say, hey, I know there's a lot of hiring going on. What do you know? What do you know about what's going on out there? You know anything available? So it's just a good idea, to always have a strong network, but then you can really leverage that when the time comes. So yeah, those two things fit together beautifully. And I think a lot of times people overlook that face-to-face relationship. I mean, we do so much talking to people on LinkedIn and social media and networking, but sometimes we forget about the people we're actually working with who know us best, who we can be able to have help us out along the way. So no, I love that. I think those are two really solid pieces of advice for people out there looking to make the jump from CRC to CRA.
Yeah, whenever we do get back to conferences, the industry conferences, that's another way to go to the booth of a CRO or to a pharmaceutical company and just express, your interest. If you're a study coordinator and you go to a SOCRA conference or an ACRP conference, that's another way to have a good conversation, face-to-face interaction, show that person that, hey, this may be someone we want to have on our team. And that also goes a long way. So, all of these items. And to go back to my last point, Brad, even if a CRA almost like recruits in, a study coordinator that they've worked with, that study coordinator can leverage that CRA who's already in the company. And once they get on board, they can use them to say, hey, can you show me the ropes? Can you show me how this system works? Can you show me? And so it almost becomes now they almost take you under their wing to a sense, as a mentor. And so that is even better than what you probably originally had thought. Now you have a mentor in the company that could show you the culture and how things are done. So that, that's another second layer to just networking and having a good rapport with your CRAs, because it can take you far. It can get you where you need, and it can give you the support when you get there.
Yeah, and that's just it. It's not; these aren't transactional, relationships. These are personal relationships, that do benefit both people over the long term. So yeah, just like that's perfect. You have a built-in mentor, perhaps, and you both help each other, continue to grow your careers. So I love that. I think that's a very kind of a nuanced thing a lot of people don't think about. So I think that's awesome piece of advice again. So after you had your CRA/CRC sort of hybrid role, what was your next step in your journey?
So the next step, I actually wanted to get and was curious about the project management. What is project management? Like a project manager / CT, clinical trial manager. Every company has a different terminology for it, but it's project management, it's clinical trial management, it's oversight of the entire trial and being responsible for the clinical delivery. And, I had a curiosity in that. I don't know why I went from CRA and just jumped to, hey, let me manage this whole thing. But, I was curious, like curious. Yeah, so I was curious.
Right.
So I actually applied at a small biotech company. By a small biotech company in San Diego, because I was still in San Diego at that time. And biotechs and small pharmaceutical companies, that's another hidden jewel that people may not realize there's opportunity there. And the reason being, I didn't have project management experience at that time. Up to that point, I just had, CRC and CRA experience. And I didn't have project management experience, but because they were a small biotech company and small pharmaceutical company are also another examples. They had a clinical development department. It was small. It was like 16 people. And they originally brought me on as like a CRA. And within like 3 months, there was a need for a project manager on a phase 4 observational study for like IBS. And so again, got in as a CRA, showed that I was interested in that project management and was offered the opportunity because I was close. I understood the processes and I had the soft skills to, with the little guidance of following another senior CTM or senior project manager, was able to understand like, okay, all right, so this is how, we negotiate investigator budgets. And this is how we work with data management to create the EDC database. And this is how we work with the medical writers to create the protocol. And at that time, because I have had CRC experience and CRA experience, I was able to really help with some of the protocol development, because what the scientists think and they dream up in a protocol, in actuality, we know that, we really can't keep these patients here 12 hours. Like,
not always practical.
Exactly. And so I was able to say, I was able to use my study coordinator experience to say, hey, what about this? We can get the same result, but it would be less pressure on the site, less pressure on the patient, more likely to be successful and have, them complete if we tweak this. So, never be afraid to kind of use your experience. If you see something in that protocol development stage, that's the time to speak up and say, hey, I don't think, having a 12-hour fasting visit that would kind of fall at 7 p.m. is practical. Maybe we need to, do something different here. That's the time that you can kind of share some of that real world experience when they're developing the protocol. Because a lot of times those scientists and the medical writers, they're so high up, they've never been at the clinic level. And to bring that, they're like, oh, I didn't even realize that this would be a complicated day or a long day or something that a study coordinator or a PI would have problems actually implementing without a lot of protocol deviations. So, my skill set up to that point was very valuable. And I enjoyed the experience. I enjoyed learning on the job how to be a project manager, how to negotiate budgets, how to find vendors, how to do vendor management of your IRB, how to do vendor management of your lab vendor, and all of those things. So I saw one level as a study coordinator as a CRA, but it was a whole totally different, not beast, but it was a whole totally different perspective to see it from the start. Like, how do we set up these lab kits in the beginning? And so knowing how the end result was at the clinic helped me with the planning from the project management position. Yeah, so it was really cool. It was really, I enjoyed it. I learned a lot. And the thing about it is, along the way, you always want to be learning, observe, pick up a tip or two, that adds to. So when you go to the next job, something for, oh, yeah, I know how to negotiate budgets. That's something you can use in your interview because you had some experience, you had some exposure. Yes, every company is different with their processes, but at least the overarching premise of, okay, I know how I did it before. Even if the process is different here, at least I know the basics of what we're looking to get. And so I just took that. And then from there, I really wanted to get CRO experience because I was kind of hearing that CRO, the CROs were getting bigger and bigger. And I was like, oh, what's going on in the CRO world? So I went from small pharma, from that biotech into a fairly big size CRO. And I stayed there. And when I was hired as an unblinded CRA. And that was new, to get that unblinded CRA experience. And not a lot of people get that as well. So good, just dealing with drug and looking to make sure the dosing was given correctly. That was fun, learning the unblinded side of the CRA position. And then at the same time, they gave me an opportunity to be a lead CRA. And so I was split on 2 studies. I was an unblinded CRA, and then I was also a lead CRA. And so that was my exposure. That lead CRA was continued exposure of like leading a team. And also it was like I worked right alongside the clinical trial manager, which was the title there at that CRO. So again, kind of just absorbing as much as you can along the way. The lead CRA, I managed all of the CRAs under me. Like I didn't travel, but if they were traveling and they had an escalation point, I was their escalation point. And then I also was on sponsor calls, and I worked very closely with the CTM and the other departments for project planning and just making sure our study stayed on time and we met interim locks and database locks and all those things. So that was another exposure of that lead CRA there. And so I like the lead CRA position. And then I would say over the last probably for the last 10 years, I've just been in the clinical trial manager space prior to becoming the director of operations at ClinEssentials. So, the clinical trial manager space, I took my first project management exposure at the biotech. Then I coupled that with my lead CRA exposure at the CRO. And even at that CRO, after about a year of being a lead CRA, I was promoted to CTM. And I've been, I spent the next portion of my time in the CTM. And sometimes I would do a CRA contract, but CTM is where I stayed before I became the director of operations at ClinEssentials.
So it sounds like a little bit of a theme, at least throughout your career, as far as sort of getting your foot in the door and maybe not the ultimate position that you wanted to end up in, or definitely not the one that you did end up in, but all along the way, absorbing as much information and experience as you can, recognizing what's transferable to the next step. And again, just by virtue of being there and present and good at what you do, you're able to accumulate, more experience, more responsibility, kind of each step along the way. So all of this goes back to you being an admin assistant at an SMO.
At an SMO, admin assistant at an SMO. But if you have the drive and the soft skills, and you speak to your manager, speak to whoever you report to, and just let them know, hey, this is what I would like to do ultimately, or I'm on the path to be. And sometimes you may not know what you're on the path to be, but just say, hey, I'm open and willing to learn other items outside of my role. Just saying that opens up so many opportunities for you. And then literally, there's only like regulatory. I haven't did as much regulatory in the sense of like submissions to the FDA. And, I never got the experience in that level, but I do have at least a basics of how to do some FDA submissions and the IND, starting that application. That skill set I never touched in depth, but there's in all the other areas I can rock it because I touched it in some point along the way.
Well, and that's the beauty, I think, of what your journey shows. And what I tell people about clinical research is that, whatever your interest is, there's something in clinical research for you. And so, again, seeing how you've progressed through, your career, you could have gone any number of directions, it sounds like, based off of whatever you wanted to pursue. Because again, you were there, you were accumulating all the experience, accumulating knowledge, just being in the game. I think that's what it takes. But again, you were able to leverage that into the direction you wanted it to go. But it could have gone 15 different ways. And again, I think that's the beauty of what we do, I think, is that, you can find something that you're passionate about within clinical research, just about whatever it may be, you can find it.
Yep, exactly. Yeah, I could have went the data management pathway, and you can be in data management, and you can be a data manager, like work in that department. You can do analysis of like all of the lab samples, and you can be like in the lab area. You can be in finance. You can be like a contract specialist and helping to put the study budgets together. There's literally, like you said, Brad, there's a million ways that you can go, and your experience level and your interest, if you see an area, just continue to foster that. Ask questions. Hey, how did you get in this? How could I, eventually get into this? And people will share their story, the nice, friendly ones that are, they'll share their story. And then you can say, hey, I can that's something I can look into. That's something that I can look into along the way. So there's so many opportunities. And even if you just sat on Indeed and just put in clinical research, and you see all kind of titles that come up, and you're like, oh, let me click in here and see what they do. Oh, let me go over here and click this one. And, you could find a whole new world of opportunity just by just clicking around to say, oh yeah, no, actually this one sounds really good. This sounds like something I would be interested in. So yeah.
Well, the industry is changing so quickly, you might even be able to make up your own path. There's things out there we haven't figured out yet.
Exactly. Yeah, there is. There's a lot of opportunity. There's a lot of opportunity. There's a lot of process improvements that can be made in the industry, even to this day, even though we have so much going on. So there's a lot of whatever tickles your fancy, you can find it, and you can probably improve on a process, in the industry.
Sure. So tell me a little bit about what you're doing now with ClinEssentials. I know that we'd like to have you back and do a more focused episode, but tell us just a little bit about what you're doing there.
Yeah, so I'm currently the director of operations, and I work with a team of clinical research professionals. And our goal is really to help the industry save time and stay organized by providing, we have pre-printed audit notes, which are called our CRA audit notes, and they replace the standard yellow sticky notes that the study coordinators typically see after a monitoring visit, and that the monitors typically place when they are monitoring. So when the monitors flagging actions, maybe something that doesn't correlate to between the source and the ECRF, or something missing from the regulatory binders. Right now, the status quo is for them to use yellow sticky notes, blank yellow sticky notes. And it's good, it's easy, it's convenient. But at the receiving side, for the study coordinators, when they come back after a monitoring visit and maybe they had 20 patients enrolled and they see a sea of yellow sticky notes, it's like overwhelming. It's like, where do I even begin? Where do I prioritize my time? And so the ClinEssentials CRA audit notes, they're color coded and pre-printed with some of our industry catchphrases like please clarify, please file, serious adverse event, concomitant medication, please complete. And there's a couple check boxes that you can fill in what's needed, like initials or a page number or a signature as a late entry, etc. So it saves the CRA time when going through multiple patients' charts, because things are color coded and they're pre-printed. So instead of having to write please complete across multiple charts, they just pull that please complete note, check off what they need, place it, and go on to the next one. And then for the study coordinator and also for the PI, when they come in at the end of the visit, they can quickly see what needs to be actioned. And if there's any trends for retraining, if they see 15 protocol deviations color coded with the red bar, it's like, well, okay, we got a lot of protocol deviations. We need to, what do we need to retrain on here? Or we got a lot of serious adverse events. What's going on over here? So it's a quick method for if you just needed to come in and see how are we doing, you can quickly tell by the colors. And then we have a pocket reference guide that for the PI and the study coordinator, they put that pocket reference guide in their pocket. So when they need to reference a color, oh, that's yellow. Oh, that's please clarify. Okay, I'll get to that. Or, oh, this one, please report to the IRB. Okay, let me get to that one first. So it just really helps with the prioritization and the communication. It streamlines it and it cuts down the action item closure time. Oh man, some of the coordinators, they say it increases their action item closure time by 25%. Others say 50% because they can quickly see what they need to look at now versus what they can come back tomorrow, the next week, or prior to the next visit to action. And the CRAs benefit, less writing for them, more streamlined communication, easy to summarize their visits to their doctors when the doctors come in and say, hey, you got 5 minutes. What do you got for me? And they're like, they can say, oh, you got so many this needs to go to the IRB. This needs to go to the, this needs to be filed. This needs to be clarified. It's quick there. And then the study coordinators on the receiving end, they can just quickly know what to do.
Yeah, I love that. It sounds like a CRA tool at first, but I mean, honestly, I look at things from the site side. I feel like that's great for doing internal auditing, or, I mean, hell, honestly, I might just hand those to my CRA and say, look, you're going to use these.
Exactly.
and this is how we do things here. So you're going to use these, and it's going to help us be more efficient at what we do. So no, I think that's amazing. And again, I think there's a lot to unpack about all that process and more. So I think, dedicating a full episode to that is something we should get on the books for sure. So awesome. Tell us where can people reach out to you and find you online, Tiffany?
So I'm new to the LinkedIn space, but I'm here and recently joined, and I love the platform. I don't know. My head was in the clouds. I don't know, but I'm here. And so you can find me at Tiffany Ashton on LinkedIn. And then also you can follow our ClinEssentials page on LinkedIn as well to learn more about the CRA audit notes and some other tools that we have. And Brad, I think you'll link my contact information. Anyone that's interested in just learning more or have any questions about my pathway, feel free to reach out. I love to help because someone helped me. So I'm always about reaching back and helping someone else who's trying to start their journey as well.
Nope, I love it. And yes, I will definitely put your contact info in our show notes. I really appreciate you sharing your journey with us, and look forward to doing another episode at least with you. And I appreciate your time. Thanks, Tiffany.
Perfect. Thanks so much, Brad. I look forward to coming back.
Thank you for listening to the Note to File podcast. All show notes, episode transcripts, and contact information can be found at notetofilepodcast.com. And again, please don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe. Thanks again for listening.